Hi everyone, welcome to the new podcast from New Ventures West called Stepping In. This podcast is a bold inquiry into life's biggest challenges with one of the oldest and most distinguished coaching schools in the world. In the spirit of curiosity, compassion, and honesty, we delve into how integral coaching can address some of the most pressing issues we face as individuals, as communities, and as stewards of our planet. We'll explore what it takes to develop the sensitivity and capacity required to live and thrive in an increasingly complex world. My name is Adam Klein, Global Graduate Director, Faculty Member at New Ventures West. I'm joined by Joe Mazzola, who is our Creative Communications Director. In each of these podcasts, we'll be inviting different members of our faculty or graduate community to talk with us about topics where they have depth of knowledge and experience. Today we have Ken Kirby with us. Ken has spent over 25 years in the water resources field working to address the challenging drought situation in California. He has a PhD in engineering, and an essential part of his background for our episode today is his extensive training and practice with several Qigong masters and years of practice in multiple forms of meditation. Hi, Ken.
Good morning.
What we're going to be talking about with Ken today is what does the body, our physical body, have to do with change and supporting us when we might be experiencing breakdowns. And I think one of the most poignant things that comes up for me around this topic is, a lot of times we have an insight into something or an idea that happens for us, and it's like, if only I could just do that, everything would be fine. And then we get into that situation where we're like, we know what to do, and our body does something completely different. So I think talking a little bit about what do we even mean when we talk about the body? Because I think a lot of people have different notions of that, and my hunch is that the dominant way of thinking about the body is just the physical, like how muscular are you, or what is your shape, are you overweight, or those type of descriptors. That's the body. But as we're talking, I'm getting a sense that we're talking about something much more rich and deep than that.
Absolutely. If you look at all of the different ways that human beings over time have studied and thought about and experimented with the body, there are many different ways to think about it. I do think the physical, biological aspect of being a physical organism is an important piece that we often overlook in our culture. I mean, you look at it, the health epidemic around obesity and other kind of chronic diseases that have become really troubling in the U.S. in particular, I think is a reflection that we've somehow lost touch with the importance of caring for the physical organism. So again, in our work in coaching, one of the first things we look at is, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating the kinds of food that I need to eat for my body to stay healthy? Am I drinking enough water? Am I getting exercise? And, again, when you're working with very intelligent people, professionals in particular, in my case, who are very much about wanting to be effective and often focused on success, they sometimes forget that if they don't sleep, it doesn't matter how many hours they work. They can't actually be very productive.
Right.
So that's a fundamental part of what it means to work with the body. I mean, just at the very basic levels, fundamental levels, what does it take for our physical organism to be healthy? And then I think we can go to the next level, which is our bodies are the locus, or the central point, are the sensing mechanism for all of our interactions in the world. So once we get to the place of just physical function, working biological function, now we can start to be curious about, how receptive are we to what's showing up in our life? And that can be from a physical stimulus like sight and sound and taste and touch. It can also be from an emotional standpoint. All of what we experience from an emotional standpoint is happening in the body. It's not just happening in our thoughts. We're actually experiencing, we have some physical reaction to what we call emotion.
Yeah, and I think this is something to maybe even go into a little bit further, because what you said was quite, there's a lot to it, I guess I would say. So and am I hearing you right, Ken? And like the body is sensing things, and it's sensing it on its own, sometimes independently of our conscious mind.
Absolutely.
And I think this is the part that we forget often, is that, I wasn't aware of it, so it didn't happen. Well, no, that's not the case. Part of the body's functioning is at a level where it's not in our conscious mind. And part of what helps us, I think, in supporting change is seeing what is the body reacting to and tuning into it consciously to see what's happening there.
Absolutely. I mean, when you go back to this notion of neuroscience, some of the statistics I've seen from the researchers is that less than 5% of our mental activity is conscious. And there's also been some very interesting research by biologists on animals in particular, but that show that our body is, we could talk about it this way, our body is programmed to respond in a particular way to a particular stimulus. So, I'm also a parent, and, we could say that we become programmed that if I walk into the kitchen and they've left their dishes on the counter yet one more time, I have a habitual response that's been programmed into it, right? And so if I'm not paying attention, then I will just act that programming out, which in many cases is not effective. It's not productive. So,
I think another big breakdown we hit, particularly when we're coaching folks who aren't as familiar with the body's working this way, is not having a conscious understanding of what the body is up to and having that be okay. Now, I have a lot of folks who, need an explanation, or they're not going to trust it.
Right.
So, intuitive information that we're getting, or even signals that our body is giving us, around being tired or having a need or something, if it can't be consciously clearly explained, it's not necessarily something we're going to trust.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to what I was saying earlier, is that as a culture, we've become, in my opinion, overly dependent. We've given more weight than is justified to our verbal analytic mind. And we think that the world is only real if we can explain it. And the way I work with my clients, I often will invite them to just experiment. Because there are things, especially the kinds of things that I'm talking about now, we can talk about it forever, but until you actually try it, you won't know what effect it's going to have.
One thing that we emphasize in our dojo is practicing as much as we can non-verbally.
Yes.
Which is challenging because we're working with each other, so it's an interaction. And it's very tempting to start to talk about what's going on, but as soon as that happens, we're in our heads. And we're out of the practice and out of the movement. And learning happens much more quickly and deeply is if we can stay with what's happening in our body, even if we can't analyze it or understand it or talk about it or ask about it. It's happening anyway, and it takes a while to build that understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we said it before, so much of what's happening in the body is happening without our conscious control, which is a really good thing. I'm glad that I don't have to remember to make my heart beat.
Right.
It'd be very difficult to be writing a letter or even having this conversation if I had to keep remembering to consciously tell my heart to beat. Same thing with our digestive system, same thing with our breathing. I mean, all of these things are happening without a need from us to control them. And yet, we often will find ourselves trying to control them in some ways, and the body responds. So the other thing I was going to say, so we look at it from a pure physical need standpoint. We talk about it in terms of an interactive standpoint. Then we can also go into something that's more subtle. And Joy, you've mentioned the word intuition a number of times. There's work that's been done, and primarily I think one of the initiators in our culture is Eugene Jenen, has done some really interesting work. He's a psychologist and a philosopher, and he's done some really interesting work around, his research was in the area of therapy. And he was curious as he was coming into the field of psychology from the field of philosophy. He was curious to understand why some people were making remarkable progress in therapy and other people seemed to make very little progress from a therapeutic standpoint. And he was looking across different modalities of therapy, and he came to understand that there was a particular behavior that could be observed across different therapeutic modalities. And if this behavior were present, then people were making change. And if this behavior were not present, then for the most part, they were making very little change that was beneficial. And he called this something the felt sense. People's ability to tune into a whole body way of understanding something. So by drawing our attention not just into our thoughts is part of it, not just our emotions are part of it, but this whole synthesized way of relating to a situation or a challenge or a problem, then we have much more capacity to respond in a generative way. Generative meaning that we can see and act out new possibilities, whereas we're not limited to our kind of habitual repetitive thoughts and other things. And it really comes down to this way of being curious about what's emerging for us as a whole human being, not just from our emotions, not just from our physical sensations, and not just from our thoughts, but it's a more integrated way, a more integral way of relating. And, we work with this a lot as integral coaches, and it's also part of the practice that I've been engaged in for a long time. And I'll tell you that the results are remarkable, not just in a therapeutic context, but our ability to be present and respond resourcefully to any situation that presents itself, it's incredible.
This is a much more subtle way of looking at the body. So we're not talking about sight or sound or physical sensation. There's this inner felt sense. And this might sound strange to people. So I'm wondering if we could take just a couple minutes to try, it's hard as an intellectual exercise, but to try to dive into this to give people some access to it.
Well, I think one of the best examples that I often give for my clients, and I think most people can relate to this if you're a driver, is that if you're driving along on the freeway, it's not uncommon for you to have this sense that someone's looking at you. And you'll turn maybe to the left if there's a car on the left side of you, and in fact you'll see that someone's looking at you. The other way to experiment with it, if you really want to be bold, is to drive and look at someone else. Now, of course, keep looking at where you're going. Don't just stare at the person and run into someone. But if you direct your attention towards someone who's driving in another lane, more often than not, they will turn and look back. How is that happening? It's a very interesting question. You'll see it with animals do it as well. There is a way of our physical being that has the capacity to notice these kinds of things that go beyond our ability to explain in a cognitive way. You see it also if you think about sports, and really famous athletes will talk about this. You look at a shortstop and a second baseman, for instance. I'm a big Giants fan, so you talk about Brandon Crawford and Joe Panik. One of the things that you see in them is that they're able to communicate with each other even if their bodies are facing away from each other. They can't see each other. They're able to do things that are quite remarkable, and it has a way, they have a feel for each other. Basketball players talk about it, football players talk about it. So these are examples of this kind of thing that we're talking about here.
Yeah, these are great examples, Ken. Thanks for the driving one is a good one. And I've had it even, you're sitting in a room and you have this sense, someone is looking at me. And you look over and you're like, yeah, they are looking at me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even more subtly than that, you walk into a room and you go, oh, something's happening in here. There's a tense conversation, or there was just an argument, or something terrible has happened, and you can just feel it without anyone saying anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a way that we can cultivate, or that we must cultivate that in ourselves. So there's the ability to perceive what's going on, and how do we develop ourselves so that we can become a more refined instrument, to pick up these signals. And one thing that I was going to put out there that I'm doing right now is feeling my feet on the floor to begin with. How often do we do that? How often do we remember that we have feet? We were talking about being mindful about the breath and feeling into different parts of our body. And one really simple way is just to feel your feet on the floor. And once you have that established, move up. Feel your legs, your knees, and do what we often call a body scan, so that you're actually in contact with your physical being. And the more in contact you are, not only can you feel what the sensations are, hot, cold, tingling, pain, whatever it is, you can also start to feel sort of waves of energy or whatever you want to call it coming from the outside. So you're kind of becoming more and more sensitive to the information. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is to bring it back to what Jenen said, that in his research, this type of tuning into these more refined felt senses in our bodies really supports lasting change and has us, confront the things that we've been dealing with in new ways, and our behavior starts to change as a result.
Yeah. The other thing that strikes me that would be interesting to talk about when we think about bodies, and we think about it in particular in the context of coaching, is that we often will say part of our work, if we want to become a coach, is to develop the body of a coach, a body that supports coaching. And that can seem like an odd concept at first, but if you think about it, think about what it means to have the body of a soldier. If you think about soldiers whom you know, they do have certain identifiable traits to how they are in their body. They often are very strong, they're very muscular, they're very firm. They have this way of being that's very disciplined, right? You can also think of what does it take to have the body of a ballet dancer, right? There are certain attributes that are necessary to dance in the way of ballet. And if you don't have that body type, you just really can't be very effective in the discipline. To go back to the example of professional sports, the body of a baseball player is different than the body of a football player often. And so we could also say in the more other professions, the more, maybe we would say more common, more mundane professions, the body of a dentist or the body of a chef or the body of a coach. There are things that are necessary in our way of being in the body to be effective in the work that we're doing. And, I'm sure that you could all list several of the traits, but those are things that we're helping students to start to identify and develop for themselves.
I think this is a fantastic point, I think, to think about if there's something that you're aiming after or a new way that you want to be living in the world, to think about what kind of body would that take and how could I cultivate that body.
Right. And when we think about where we want to be, so say, we're all, the three of us anyway, are interested in cultivating the body of a coach. That doesn't mean that we're all going to take up the same practices or approach it in the same way, because we all have different angles. We have different edges of what we're needing to cultivate. So, for example, one of us may need to work on being more receptive. Another of us may need to work on being more, to use my own example, sort of direct in conversation, more articulate, more quiet. So when we're working on building the body of a coach, it's not that we're all, simply working on relaxing and being open. There are lots of different aspects that each one of us have. So we're all kind of coming at it from wherever we started.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that there's no off-the-shelf formula for how to develop the body of a coach. And yet, we can identify common traits, common capacities that are supportive to be in the role of coach. And we can assess, when we look at someone that's sitting across from us, where they have those traits now and where they don't. And then you can tailor a developmental plan. You can tailor a set of practices to support the cultivation of those traits that we need more of.
Well, this has been great. Anything else, Ken, that you think would be a helpful thing to say about the body and its supportive change?
Well, I think the other thing I would say is that, along with our development, so our way of coaching, our way of helping support effective change in the world is really developmental. It has this understanding that, just like, as you were saying, children can develop through their stages, and many people know childhood development, right? Well, adults can also develop and really have the opportunity, have the capacity to continue to grow and develop until they die. And so what we find that as we continue to unfold in more and more complexity, more richness as a human being, the body plays a more central role. That and if you look at most spiritual traditions, especially those from the Eastern way of understanding human being, the body and working with the body it becomes just as important as working with the mind. And so what I would say is that the more we work with understanding and coming into good relationship with the body, the more we appreciate it, the more we feel supported by it. And at some point, we actually stop talking about it as if it's not us.
Right.
Yeah. So there's so much more that could be said. And I, as a student of human development, as a practitioner of mind-body integration, people study and talk about and practice these things for a lifetime. So,
It's been a delight to have you. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
This is Adam Klein, Global Graduate Director, faculty member at New Ventures West, and I've been joined by Creative Communications Director Joy Mazzola and special guest Ken Kirby. This is the inaugural episode of our podcast, Stepping In. Please spread the news by sharing this podcast on social media and let us know what you think by emailing us at steppingin@newventureswest.com. Until next time, take care.